Beskar dreams, drifting into the Mandalorian. Legend war defines many cultures, but for some, the battle is not only in the past, it is carried in every step and every breath. Some peoples wear their history on their skin in ink and scars, others in flags and fading monuments. The Mandalorians carry theirs in armor, in beskar plates, hammered and reforged across generations, until memory becomes metal, and identity becomes a weight that never comes off in a galaxy of shimmering hyperspace lanes and distant star fields. There is always the faint echo of blaster fire somewhere just beyond, hearing the hum of starfighter engines. The low thrum of a capital ship slipping into orbit, yet beneath that constant galactic conflict, there moves a quieter presence, warriors who choose creed over comfort, clan over solitude, and custom over safety. They believed that a life without a code was no life at all, even if that code led through endless war. This is the Mandalorian way, a culture not bound to a single species, but to a shared promise. Helmets that never lift before outsiders, T-shaped visors that reveal nothing, and beskar forged to resist the blades of Jedi and the fire of blasters when the Force bends empires and topples Sith and Jedi alike. Mandalorians answer with something far more simple: discipline training, and the certainty that armor and honor are stronger than fear. Tonight the story is theirs. Tonight the long Mandalorian timeline unfolds from the first warlords who gave Mandalore its name, to the crusaders who challenged the Jedi Order, from the pacifist dreamers who built shining domes over a ruined world to the scattered survivors of imperial wrath. What followed was not a straight path of glory, but a cycle of rise and fall, conquest and ruin, exile and return, each age leaving another layer of metal on the same enduring myth. This journey will drift from ancient Old Republic campaigns to the Mandalorian Jedi wars that shattered worlds and turned Mandalore's surface into glass. It will pass through the quiet city of Sundari under its protective dome, where new Mandalorians tried to bury the old ways, and through the dark reign of Deathwatch and Darth Maul, when the darksaber cut through throne rooms and allegiances alike. What they found there would change everything, as Mandalorians learned that the greatest enemy was often another Mandalorian. In time, the Empire came with its own Cold Order fusion bombs, falling on Mandalore in the Great Purge, turning a proud world into haunted ruins. For the next 1,000 years, in legend, survivors fled across the Outer Rim, broken into scattered clans and hidden coverts. Yet even in the shadow of the New Republic, beskar endured in the hands of Din Djarin, Bo-Katan, Kryze, and foundlings searching for a home that might no longer exist. This is a tale meant to be heard at the edge of sleep, a measured chronicle told softly enough that attention can drift and return as battles and years pass by. In the dark, the wars will continue. The darksaber will change hands, worlds will rise and fall, and the Mandalorian creed will bend but not quite break. So let the story move at its own steady pace, knowing that whether consciousness holds every detail or not, the legend will continue to unfold around the listener, from the first Mandalore to the children of the New Republic era. Before the helmet, Mandalore's distant violent dawn. Before those later legends, there was only a harsh world and the beings stubborn enough to claim it. Long before the Republic took shape, millennia before the Battle of Yavin, the galactic map was a patchwork of warring species, young empires, and uncharted voids where even the Jedi hesitated to go. In that distant dark, on the edge of known space, the story of Mandalore began. The Mandalorians were never a single species. They were an idea, a creed that could wrap itself around anyone strong enough to carry it. The first to bear that mantle were the Taung, a near-extinct warrior people driven from Coruscant in forgotten wars. They believed that exile was not an end but a trial, and what followed was a long, dangerous exodus through wild hyperspace, hunting for a new home in a galaxy that did not want them. Around them, the early Republic flickered weakly, the Jedi Order still learning how to project calm into a turbulent galaxy. Far beyond that fragile light, the Taung found a world that seemed almost to dare them to land. What they found there would change everything. It was a planet of violent storms and ragged continents, where megafauna stalked the plains and the very soil hinted at buried wars. The Taung named it Mandalore, after their greatest war leader, and in doing so bound their own survival to its unforgiving nature. Mandalore was once livable, but never gentle. Razor-beaked predators hunted from crimson skies, titanic beasts prowled the wastes, and early human settlers who followed the Tong learned quickly that hesitation meant death. Tribes clashed over water, over territory, over the right to scavenge the armored carcass of a fallen creature. In this crucible, a culture formed that glorified strength, adaptability, and conquest. Mercy was rare. Preparation was everything. From these endless tribal wars emerged the first Mandalores, warlords powerful enough to bend scattered clans into a single spear point. Each Mandalore took the title Sole Ruler, not as a claim of birthright, but as a proof of victory. Under their banners, the Mandalorians became more than survivors. They became crusaders. Whole clans left Mandalore on great campaigns, testing themselves against fortified worlds, fledgling empires, and any defenders bold enough to stand in their path. For the next 1,000 years, war became their sacred language. Ceremonial armor was forged to turn survival into ritual, helmets hiding species and origin until only creed remained. They believed that conflict revealed truth, that the weak deserved defeat, and that the strong had a duty to conquer. In a galaxy where the dark side whispered to many ambitious powers, this philosophy made the Mandalorians both feared and strangely predictable. Yet far away, another tradition was taking shape. The Jedi refined an opposite path, serving peace, restraint, and balance in the Force. One culture defined by conflict, one order devoted to preventing it. Their meeting was inevitable. When Mandalorian crusaders finally set their sights on the Republic's shining core, the collision between beskar and lightsaber would reshape both peoples, and the scars of that first true Mandalorian Jedi war would echo through history. The first Crusaders, forging a creed in endless war. The Mandalorian Crusades did not begin as a grand design. They began as hunger, as border raids on neighboring systems, as armored riders testing their strength against anyone who stood too close to Mandalore's scarred horizon. But as their clashes with the Republic and the Jedi grew more frequent, those scattered skirmishes hardened into something colder and more deliberate. What followed was the birth of the Mandalorian Crusaders, disciplined warbands that turned raiding from survival into vocation, and then into destiny. Around these early Crusaders, war became organized with almost religious care. Clans that once fought each other for resources now assembled into coalitions under a chosen Mandalore, launching galactic campaigns that struck at trade routes, colonies, and frontier worlds. They believed that a people unwilling to fight did not deserve to hold their territory. Each new campaign was treated as both conquest and trial, a way to measure the strength of the Mandalorians against the wider galaxy and against themselves. Their armor reflected this transformation. Early beskar plating was crude by later standards, hammered into overlapping segments that left seams and scars visible, but those scars were the point. Plates were etched with kill tallies, family lines, and victories. A single shoulder guard might carry the history of 3 generations. The now iconic T-shaped visor began to appear, not yet uniform, but recognizable. A stark slit that turned every crusader's face into an impassive mask. Around it, clan sigils bloomed in paint and engraved metal, mythosaurs, shrieking birds of prey, stylized blades. Every piece of gear carried meaning and memory. A dent left unpolished might mark a duel with a Jedi Guardian on some nameless moon. A braided cord at the waist could represent a sworn oath to a Mandalore, or the adoption of a foundling into the clan. Over time, these details became a visual language, an unspoken record of loyalty, loss, and power written in beskar and leather. From this culture of armor and ordeal, a creed began to crystallize. Victory was virtue, defeat was instruction. They believed that combat revealed one's true self, stripping away pretense in the heat of blaster fire and the clash of vibroblades. Species mattered less than conduct. A warrior who proved worthy in battle, even a former enemy, could be taken in as a foundling, raised under a new name, a new sigil, and a new set of obligations. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history forever, because it meant Mandalorian bloodlines were defined not by biology, but by choice. In this way, the Mandalorians came to see themselves as chosen by conflict itself. The galaxy was their testing ground. The Force, in their eyes, was not a path to serenity, but a current that hurled rivals into their path. They tested the Republic's defenses, shattered Jedi lines, and in turn were broken and reforged by defeat. For the next 1,000 years, tales of their crusades would spread, painting them as armored phantoms who arrived without warning and left only ruins and legends. Yet, in the same era, another order was quietly refining opposite values, meditating in stone temples, training with calm precision, and teaching that true power lay in restraint. The story of the Sith begins not with these monks, but the Jedi watched the Mandalorians with growing concern, sensing that a greater storm was forming. Somewhere between beskar and robes, between creed and code, a collision was coming that neither side fully understood, and the first hint of that meeting was already moving through the shadows of the Outer Rim. When beskar met the blade, first shadows of the Jedi, power means little until it meets something that refuses to move. Far from the clatter of beskar and the fire of Mandalorian conquest, another tradition was forming in quiet halls of stone and light, listening not to drums of war, but to the currents of the Force. On distant worlds, in temples carved into mountains and raised above silver deserts, the early Jedi Order meditated in stillness. They believed that the Force was not a weapon to be seized, but a living balance to be served. While Mandalorian clans forged armor and tested blades, these robed mystics practiced restraint, turning their senses inward, learning to feel the faintest tremor of fear, anger, or aggression and let it pass. Where the Mandalorians saw conflict as the crucible of greatness, the Jedi saw it as a wound in the galactic fabric that had to be healed. The contrast could not have been sharper. Mandalorians honored victory, lineage, and the visible symbols of strength. Sigils on pauldrons, scars on helmets, trophies from conquered foes. Jedi honored composure, humility, and the invisible discipline of standing down when power could easily be used. Mandalorians believed that a warrior untested in war was unfinished. Jedi believed that a warrior eager for war was already lost. One creed pushed ever outward, searching for the next worthy opponent. The other turned inward, guarding against the dark side that could twist even noble intentions into tyranny. Yet even in those early centuries, their paths did not remain separate. Along the hyperlanes of the Outer Rim, traitors, mercenaries, and frightened captains carried stories in both directions. Among Mandalorian camps, rumors spread of ascetic knights in simple robes who could move starship debris with a gesture, who carried blades of pure light that could cut through dura steel. In Jedi enclaves, hushed reports spoke of armored warriors whose plates could turn aside blaster fire and whose relentless charges had shattered entire planetary defenses. What followed was a slow, almost inevitable escalation of curiosity. For the Mandalorians, these tales were not omens to fear, but invitations. An enemy who could hurl a warrior aside without touching them, who could stand alone against a squad and survive, sounded less like a nightmare and more like a worthy test. Pride turned the unknown into a challenge. If such power existed, then defeating it would prove the supremacy of their creed. In the Jedi Council chambers, the reaction was different, but no less intense. The Order sensed a culture that treated war as a way of life, an empire of helmets and banners that might one day threaten the fragile Republic. Yet even then, Jedi Masters counseled patience and understanding, searching for paths that might avert open war. When an unstoppable creed of warriors finally met an unyielding order of peacekeepers, which would bend first, the steel or the code? The answer would begin to emerge the first time beskar rang against a blade of light, and what they found there would change everything. The Mandalorian expanse, conquests before the Great Wars. When a creed is forged around conflict, expansion becomes a form of prayer. For the Mandalorians, the early clashes with the Jedi were not an ending, but a beginning. What followed was an era in which warbands became legions, and scattered clans learned to move as a single, armored tide across the stars. From Mandalore and its neighboring sectors, they pushed outward along the hyperlanes, testing the defenses of nearby systems. At first, these were raids, swift strikes on frontier worlds, the taking of resources, weapons, and prisoners. But as victories accumulated, the clans began to coordinate. Under successive bearers of the title, Mandalore, those raids hardened into campaigns. Isolated strongholds became staging grounds, then fortified worlds, each one stripped, reshaped, and left behind as a monument of dura steel, beskar, and half-buried war relics. They believed that a warrior culture could only remain pure if it was always in motion. So, the Mandalorian host became semi-nomadic, its fleets roaming, its armies descending on one system after another. Some planets, defended by weak militias or fractured governments, were crushed in days. Others chose a different fate. Individuals and even entire species bent the knee, were granted armor, and were slowly folded into the creed. The history of the Mandalorians is filled with names that did not begin on Mandalore at all, but were reborn under its banners. Not every encounter ended in conquest. Certain merchant powers and regional authorities, unable to defeat the Mandalorian war machine, yet too valuable to destroy, were bound into uneasy alliances. Tribute worlds supplied fuel, food, and starships in exchange for protection from pirates and rival empires. In these arrangements, Mandalorian capital ships hung in orbit as both shield and threat, their presence a constant reminder that loyalty was measured in shipments, not sentiment. Each campaign refined their art of war. Jetpacks, once tools for hunting across Mandalore's broken terrain, became central to their tactics, turning infantry into three-dimensional strike swarms. Coordinated assault teams practiced breaching maneuvers that began in orbit, continued through atmosphere, and ended in synchronized detonations at key strongpoints. Armor variants emerged for every environment: sealed suits for toxic worlds, insulated plates for frozen moons, reinforced joints and magnetic clamps for combat on starship hulls. In time, beskar itself was worked into specialized forms, tuned to resist not only blades and blaster fire, but stranger threats. Across these conquests, whispers began to spread of enemies who did not fall so easily. Champions who turned aside blaster bolts with a gesture, prophets and warrior monks who fought with luminous blades. The Mandalorians, ever practical, started to treat such beings as a distinct category of opponent. They studied them, captured records, battlefield observations. Even the scars left in durasteel by those burning swords became data. Their engineers experimented with countermeasures, grappling lines to bind sword arms, wrist-mounted flamethrowers to blind and overwhelm, and armor geometries that deflected, rather than absorbed, impossible strikes. Far away, in the serene halls of the Republic, the Jedi Order examined reports of armored crusaders who treated war as worship. At first, these seemed distant disturbances, part of the endless ebb and flow of galactic conflict. But as Mandalorian fleets edged closer to the core, patterns emerged that could not be ignored. For the next 1,000 years, the Jedi had watched empires rise and fall. Now, for the first time since the Great Sith Wars, they faced an enemy that did not seek the dark side, yet rivaled the Sith in discipline, ferocity, and scale. The stage was set. Beskar had been tempered by 100 campaigns. The Republic had begun to take notice. The Jedi turned their gaze toward the Outer Rim, tracing the advance of an armored storm. Some masters warned that if this tide was not checked, it would one day break on Coruscant itself. When the Mandalorians finally chose their next crusade, would the Guardians of Peace be ready, or would the galaxy learn what happens when an unstoppable creed slams into an unbreakable code? The Mandalorian Jedi Wars. Fire against the Force. Power is most dangerous when both sides believe their cause is righteous. As Mandalorian War, fleets finally surged from the Outer Rim into Republic space. That belief turned the galactic frontier into a furnace. Around the era of the Old Republic's great expansions, Mandalorian crusaders swept across sectors in disciplined waves, not as raiders, but as an organized war machine. They believed that only by testing themselves against the strongest foes could honor be proven, and the Republic, defended by the Jedi, was the greatest target they could imagine. What followed was a chain of campaigns that forced the Guardians of Peace to become commanders, tacticians, and, when all else failed, executioners. Battles that had once been fought on remote worlds now raged above core-bound trade routes. Mandalorian capital ships hammered planets with orbital bombardments, softening cities before ground assaults. Sieges dragged on for months, with armored warriors advancing street by street through shattered skylines. When Jedi strike teams finally met them in the ruins, the contrast was stark. Robed figures moving with the Force through smoke and fire, clashing with beskar-clad soldiers whose only creed was to advance or die. Early in these wars, many Mandalorians fell to lightsabers that carved through conventional armor and weapons. But Mandalorians were students of war as much as worshippers of it. They adapted. They refined beskar, the iron of Mandalore, forging plates and helms that could deflect or even catch a lightsaber's blade. They engineered grappling lines to yank Jedi from the air, jetpacks to match force-enhanced leaps, and wrist-mounted flamethrowers and darts to break concentration. What they found there would change everything. A realization that technology, discipline, and sheer will could stand against the mysticism of the Force. To the Mandalorians, this was proof that the galaxy's so-called sorcerers could bleed. To the Jedi, it was a chilling revelation that their traditional advantages were not absolute. Duels became slower, more grueling, as sabers slid off beskar and force, pushes met anchored boots and counter-thrusts. In these cramped, brutal engagements, the war stopped being abstract ideology and became the simple question of who would fall first. Beneath the tactics ran a deeper philosophical clash. The story of the Sith begins not with monsters, but with fallen Jedi who embraced the dark side. In a different way, the Mandalorians represented another mirror. They believed that a worthy death in battle was the highest purpose, while the Jedi sought to end conflict with minimal harm. Each side struggled to understand the other's measure of victory. For the next 1,000 years, echoes of those misunderstandings would haunt every meeting between armor and robe. The cost was staggering. Worlds were left cratered and glassed, Mandalore's own surface steadily scarred by the very wars its people craved. These campaigns did not only burn cities, they burned questions into Mandalorian identity about whether endless crusade was destiny or doom. Soon, one Mandalore would take those questions to a catastrophic extreme, turning the Mandalorian Jedi Wars from devastation into something far worse than war. Mandalore the Ultimate, a warlord's dream of total war. In the quiet that follows devastation, there is always someone who believes that the fire was not hot enough. For the Mandalorians, that figure was Mandalore the Ultimate. He rose in an age when the clans were scattered raiders and mercenaries, their ancient crusades remembered more as legend than law. Mandalore the Ultimate looked at those fading embers and decided they should become a galactic inferno. They believed that the warrior's path meant nothing if it was not tested against the strongest possible foe, and in that era, no power shone brighter than the Republic and its Jedi Guardians. In his mind, only a single defining conflict could answer the question that haunted Mandalorian history: destiny or doom? To prepare for that answer, he rebuilt the Creed into a war machine. He called the clans to him, with promises of honor, plunder, and a place in legend, reforging them into neo-crusaders clad in uniform armor, marching beneath a single banner. Worlds that had once seen Mandalorians as hired blades now watched organized legions descend from orbit in cold, disciplined formations. Under Mandalore the Ultimate, the old chaos of the clans hardened into something closer to an empire of beskar and fire. Yet his vision did not grow in isolation. In the dark between stars, other voices whispered. Envoys and masked agents, human and inhuman, carried rumors and intelligence to his throne. They spoke of Republic weaknesses, of border worlds left undefended, of Jedi bound by caution and debate. Their presence was subtle, their allegiance unspoken, but the shadow of the Sith lay over every suggestion. The story of the Sith begins not with Mandalore, yet their talent for turning existing conflict into catastrophic war found a perfect instrument in his ambition. When he finally struck, what followed was a slow, methodical storm. The Mandalorian Wars opened at the galactic fringes. Outer Rim colonies burned, shipyards fell, and trade routes were severed. Planetary militias and local defense forces crumbled beneath orbital bombardments and precision ground assaults. Entire sectors were declared lost before the Republic Senate truly understood that this was not another border raid, but an existential war. The Jedi watched in growing unease. Some masters counseled patience, trusting the Force and diplomacy to contain the crisis. Others looked at the casualty reports and saw only failure and restraint. Jedi task forces flew to the front as healers, negotiators, and limited escorts, but they were forbidden from leading full-scale offensives. The Order feared that embracing total war would draw them toward the dark side. The Mandalorians counted on that hesitation. As the years dragged on, worlds such as Cathar and Seriko became bywords for annihilation, their populations scattered or turned to ash. Each atrocity sent new tremors through the Jedi Council chambers. How long could Guardians of Peace stand aside while the Republic bled? Eventually, one Jedi stopped asking that question and acted. A knight named Revan stepped forward, mask still absent, conviction already unyielding. Gathering followers who shared his outrage, he vowed to take the fight directly to Mandalore the Ultimate, council approval or not. What they found there would change everything. A warlord eager for a final test, and a battlefield, Malachor Phipps, where their duel would end an era and begin a shadow that would haunt Mandalorians for centuries. The war was about to reach its breaking point, and the line between Savior and Sith was about to blur. The mask falls, Revan, defeat, and the shattering of Mandalore power can end a war, but it can also unmake a people. On the broken world of Malachor Phipps, both the Mandalorians and the Jedi were about to learn how far the Force could be pushed before it shattered everything around it. The final phase of the Mandalorian Wars drew both sides toward that dark gravity well. Revan and his followers drove the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders back system by system, until Mandalore the Ultimate chose Malachor V as his crucible. They believed that a world steeped in ancient buried power would favor warriors willing to embrace any cost. What followed was not a battle in the traditional sense, but an execution written across a planet's crust. Malachor's surface was already scarred by forgotten wars. Its gravity storms twisted fleets, its canyons swallowed armies. Above it, Mandalorian cruisers and basilisk war droids clashed with a desperate Republic armada now effectively under Revan's command. Below, on the shattered plains, armored shock troopers met Jedi Knights who were no longer certain where the light ended and the dark side began. At the center of this storm, Revan and Mandalore the Ultimate finally met. Beskar plate, hammered in the forges of Mandalore, rang against the humming edge of a crimson lightsaber. Each blow was a collision of philosophies, as much as steel and plasma. The Mandalorian creed of unyielding conflict against a Jedi strategist who had learned to weaponize compassion and ruthlessness in equal measure. Mandalore's Beskad and wrist-mounted flamethrowers pressed the attack, but Revan read the flows of the Force, turning each assault into an opening. When the duel ended, Mandalore lay defeated in the dust of Malachor. Revan knelt, not in reverence, but in grim purpose, and removed the warlord's mask. This was no simple trophy. For Mandalorians, that mask was the office of Mandalore itself, passed from leader to leader across centuries. It was a banner, a promise, a single face worn by many to bind countless clans into one will. With that gesture, the Mandalorian Empire ended. Revan did not destroy the mask, he hid it. By seizing and concealing the symbol, he ensured that no new, undisputed Mandalore could rise to rally the scattered survivors. The fleets were broken by the mass shadow generator, their warriors disarmed by surrender terms that forbade organized armies. The proud crusaders who had once threatened the Republic now drifted through the galactic underworld as mercenaries, bodyguards, and bounty hunters, selling their skills to survive. Some clans retreated to the ruined world of Mandalore, clinging to old traditions in the shadows, telling stories of beskar and glory around low fires. Others adapted, trading open conquest for contracts and personal codes, quietly reshaping what it meant to be Mandalorian when the era of empires was gone. The mask's absence became a wound in their history, an empty throne that haunted every duel, every oath, every whispered claim to leadership. From this ruin, new interpretations of the creed would slowly emerge. Some would be harsher, dreaming of a return to galactic war. Others would seek a quieter path, trying to reconcile honor with survival. But all of them would live beneath the shadow of Malachor V, where a single duel and a single mask had broken a people and set their destiny adrift, waiting for the day someone dared to claim that face again. In the centuries to come, that question, who has the right to wear the Mandalorian mask, would ignite fresh conflicts and draw the gaze of Jedi, Sith, and warlords back to a culture struggling to remember what it truly was. From crusaders to mercenaries, surviving. Without a Mandalore, power fades more quietly than it rises. And for the Mandalorians, the age after Malachor was not marked by a single great defeat, but by a long, drifting silence. Their mask had been broken, their Mandalore gone, And what followed was not a noble surrender, but a slow scattering into the wider galactic night. Without a central war to fight, many Mandalorians turned to the only trade their history had prepared them for. Across the Outer Rim and beyond, warriors who had once marched in crusades now signed contracts as mercenaries, bounty hunters, and private security. A single armored figure might stand guard in a Hutt palace. Another might stalk a target through the underlevels of Coruscant, while a small band sold its protection to a frightened frontier colony, their beskar gleaming under unfamiliar suns. In these wandering years, the clans became ships, safe houses, and half-remembered meeting places on neutral moons. They believed that as long as the armor endured, the people endured. Helmets and cuirasses were passed down from parent to child, sometimes patched with scavenged durasteel, where true beskar had been lost, each plate carrying scars from campaigns no one had recorded. Around campfires on desolate worlds, elders whispered the names of Mandalore the Ultimate and Mandalore the Preserver, telling stories of war against both Jedi and Sith, so that children raised far from the homeworld would still dream in the old language of conquest. Training began early. Even foundlings taken in from a dozen different species learned to field strip a blaster before they could read a star chart. In cramped cargo holds, Guardians drilled them in close-quarters combat, jetpack maneuvers, and the small, precise courtesies of clan honor. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history forever, because every orphan given a helmet kept the creed alive in a galaxy that assumed it was dying. Yet beneath the rituals, a quiet tension pulled the culture in different directions. Some veterans longed openly for a new crusade, for a leader who would unite the banners and carve out an empire once more, ending the humiliation of working for credits under foreign employers. Others, worn down by centuries of conflict, accepted a quieter existence, measuring victory not in conquered worlds, but in contracts fulfilled, families fed, and children who lived long enough to grow old. In this era, Mandalorian identity became more fluid than it had ever been. The story of the Sith begins not with monsters, but with fallen Jedi. And in a similar way, many Mandalorians of this age were not born under Mandalore's sky at all. Foundlings from Republic worlds, ex-soldiers, smugglers, and refugees were adopted into clans, taught that armor and oath mattered more than blood. For the next 1,000 years, this widening of the creed kept the culture from vanishing entirely, even as it blurred the line between ancient tradition and practical survival. Far away, Mandalore itself changed with every forgotten decade. Its once lush surface, already scarred by earlier wars, continued to suffer under exploitation, bombardment, and political experiments that tried to bury the warrior past under domes and pacifist ideals. The planet became a mirror of its people, fractured, armored, and uncertain whether endless war was still the way, or a wound that could finally be allowed to close. What they found there would change everything, but the clans wandering the stars were not yet ready to face what their home world had become. A wounded world, Mandalore's scars and the seeds of change. Mandalore had once been green. Forests, rivers, and open skies had given the first warriors their hunting grounds and their freedom. After centuries of Mandalorian crusades, Jedi counterattacks, and galactic war, that world was now a scar. Orbital bombardments had hammered the crust until whole regions fused into glass. Superweapons, from mass drivers to experimental energy projectors, carved blackened impact seas where cities had stood. Poisoned rain fell through a thin, damaged atmosphere, carrying the residue of countless detonations and chemical agents. In some places, the sand itself glowed faintly in the dark, a reminder that power, when turned inward, could be more devastating than any outside enemy. What followed was a slow retreat from the open sky. Surviving populations clustered in fortified cities and sealed domes, ringed with shields and scrubbers that filtered the air and kept out the toxic dust. Sundari, with its gleaming white towers beneath a transparent canopy, became the most famous of these experiments, an artificial oasis suspended above a dead plain. Outside the walls, ancient battlefields stretched to the horizon, littered with rusting walkers, shattered gunships, and half-buried beskar plates that no one dared reclaim. Inside the domes, Mandalorians relied on technology to survive the very environment their own wars had created. Climate regulators mimicked lost seasons. Hydroponic gardens replaced once fertile valleys. Children learned to walk under artificial skies, their first view of the real Mandalore filtered through radiation screens and hazard warnings. They believed that this was normal, that a world encased in glass and metal was simply the price of being Mandalorian. Yet the old creed did not vanish. In clan strongholds and hidden moon outposts, traditionalists swore that war was still their destiny. They kept their armor polished, their sigils bright, and their stories sharper than their blades. To them, the domed cities were a betrayal, a retreat from the way into softness and fear. In hushed conversations, they spoke of tearing down the shields, reclaiming the deserts, and proving once more that Mandalore could only live through conquest. Within the cities, another question began to form, quiet but persistent. If endless conflict had brought Mandalore to the brink of extinction, could the creed evolve without losing its soul? Early pacifist thinkers, philosophers, and administrators argued that the warrior heritage could be honored in discipline, unity, and resilience rather than in constant battle. The story of the Sith begins not with monsters, but with fallen Jedi who twisted noble ideals. These new Mandalorian voices feared a similar fate if their people clung only to the dark echo of past glory. Some proposed disarmament, neutral diplomacy, and strict isolation from galactic wars. Others suggested that armor be ceremonial, not a uniform of permanent readiness. To many clans, these ideas sounded almost heretical. Yet, in council chambers beneath Sundari's dome, in classrooms where children studied the Republic instead of ancient crusades, the seed was planted. For the next 1,000 years, that seed would grow in secret debates and careful reforms, until one day a movement would rise that dared to set aside the helmet, to reject the blade, and to embrace peace. What they found there would change everything once more, dividing Mandalore more deeply than any Sith plot or Jedi crusade, and turning the question of what it meant to be Mandalorian into the most dangerous conflict of all. The new Mandalorians. Peace under glass domes. That question would be answered not by another conqueror in Beskar, but by those who chose to set their armor aside. In the aftermath of endless war, a new faction emerged on Mandalore, one that turned away from the old creed of conquest and vowed that the planet would never again be buried under its own ashes. They called themselves the New Mandalorians. They were political leaders, artisans, engineers, and ordinary citizens who renounced the path of the warrior and built their power on diplomacy rather than on the blade. They believed that Mandalore's strength could be measured not in slain enemies but in trade routes, cultural exchanges, and careful negotiations with the Republic. Where the ancient Mandalorians had chased glory across the stars, the new Mandalorians chased stability, art, and technology, hoping to heal a world that had nearly died from its own hunger for conflict. The cost of that old hunger could be seen on the planet's surface. Centuries of Mandalorian Jedi wars and civil strife had turned Mandalore into a shattered, glassed wasteland, its once lush plains fused into lifeless, cutting deserts. To survive, the new Mandalorians raised cities under gleaming domes, the most famous of them, Sundari. It rose from the devastation as a perfect circle of order, a literal bubble of peace on a ruined world, its clean lines and pale towers standing in quiet defiance of the chaos outside. Inside Sundari, broad plazas opened beneath an artificial sky, painted in soft blues and gentle clouds. White walkways curved over reflecting pools. Public gardens grew in carefully measured soil, monitored by precise climate systems that kept every breath of air under control. The city became a symbol and a promise. Mandalore would no longer trust the wild, unpredictable galaxy beyond the transparasteel, but would instead craft a controlled sanctuary, sealed against war and the dark side of its own past. To the new Mandalorians, the old ways were not glorious legends. They were warnings. They believed that the warrior creed had become a tragic, self-destructive cycle, one that had nearly killed their world and dragged Mandalore into the orbit of Sith empires and Jedi crusades time and again. The tales of Mandalore, the Ultimate, and the Great Crusade still echoed in their history, but now they were taught as cautionary stories, reminders of what followed when pride and armor were given more value than life itself. Yet beyond the domes, not everyone accepted this peace. Traditionalist clans looked upon Sundari and saw not salvation, but betrayal. To them, the new Mandalorians had abandoned everything that once made their people feared and respected across the galactic frontier. They whispered that a Mandalorian without armor was already defeated, that a Mandalore defended by treaties instead of warriors was no Mandalore at all, and their resentment simmered in the wastes. For a moment, the grand sweep of history narrows to a single quiet day. Inside Sundari, children chase one another through the plazas, their laughter echoing under the painted sky. They learn about art, about science, about the Republic, and some have never even seen real sand or felt unfiltered wind. Outside the dome, in the harsh light on the glassed plains, old warriors watch the city from the shadows of broken ridges, armor scarred, crests faded, hands resting on weapons that have not yet been forgotten. Between the transparasteel and the wasteland, two Mandalores face one another without speaking. One is peaceful, bright, and carefully tended. The other is harsh, proud, and unyielding. That tension between dome and desert would not remain silent forever, and when it finally broke, what followed was a new kind of civil war, one that would bring hidden factions into the open and draw Mandalore once more into the currents of galactic history. Satine cries, the Duchess who chose, peace over Beskar. On a world exhausted by centuries of war, peace can be as radical as any weapon. In the quiet between dome and desert, one figure stepped forward to gamble Mandalore's entire future on restraint rather than fire. Her name was Satine Kryze, Duchess of Mandalore, and she carried herself not as a warlord, but as a reformer determined to end the cycle that had scorched her planet to glass. Satine had survived Mandalorian civil wars as a younger woman, hunted by rival factions while the air itself burned with jetpack exhaust and turbo laser fire. Those years convinced her that if Mandalore continued to glorify conflict, there might be nothing left to save. When her faction, the new Mandalorians, finally prevailed, what followed was not a triumphant crusade, but a deliberate turning away from the old ways. They believed that armor, creeds, and conquest had brought only ruin, and that survival now demanded a different kind of courage. In this new vision, Satine reached outward, toward the Jedi and the Republic. During the chaos of her youth, Jedi Guardians had protected her, among them a young Obi-Wan Kenobi, whose duty slowly softened into something more complicated. Their relationship, carefully restrained, became a symbol of a possible new alignment. Mandalore and the Jedi Order, standing together not as enemies on a battlefield, but as allies bound by the Force and a shared hope for stability. The story of the Sith begins not with monsters or demons, and in the same way, this chapter of Mandalorian history begins not with beskar and blasters, but with quiet diplomatic missions and tense conversations in Sundari's gleaming halls. As Duchess, Satine pursued policies that cut directly against Mandalore's ancient identity. She ordered disarmament and demilitarization, dismantling armies and grounding fleets. Warrior clans were pushed to the margins, their once feared houses reduced to ceremonial roles or political footnotes. The dome cities, especially Sundari, became showcases of pacifist power, clean lines, open plazas, and unarmed citizens walking beneath artificial skies, carefully insulated from the dead wasteland outside. To her, supporters, this was salvation. To traditionalists, it was an insult written into law. They saw ancestral armor locked away, combat training discouraged, and children taught that Mandalore's proud crusader heritage was an embarrassment. Under Satine's rule, Mandalore stayed neutral even as the Galactic Clone War ignited, refusing to join either the Republic or the Separatists. Many feared that this left the planet exposed, its people dependent on treaties rather than on beskar and battle-hardened warriors. Resentment festered in the shadows, in old strongholds and hidden camps beyond the domes. There, men and women donned the T-shaped visor again and whispered that Mandalore had been stolen from its true heirs. What they found there would change everything, because a different vision of Mandalore was gathering strength, one that wore the old armor proudly and spoke of restoring the true way. For the next 1,000 years was no longer the promise. The question now was how soon that darker dream would step into the light. Death Watch rises. The old creed and new shadows. Power rarely disappears. It retreats, regathers, and returns wearing a different mask. On Mandalore, the polished glass of pacifist dome cities hid an older, sharper truth. Not every clan had agreed to lay down its arms. In the shadows of this new order, something ancient began to stir. Among the traditionalist clans, resentment hardened into creed. They believed that Satine's new Mandalorians had betrayed Mandalore's very soul, trading honor and strength for Republic favor and fragile peace. From those embers rose Death Watch, a splinter faction that claimed to be the true heirs of the ancient Crusaders, vowing to restore Mandalore's warrior reputation through fire, fear, and open conflict. Where Satine spoke of rebuilding, Death Watch whispered of conquest. Their appearance alone was a manifesto. Death Watch warriors marched in blue and gray beskar, colder than the sands outside Sundari's domes, their armor bearing skull-like sigils that evoked the mythosaur and the beasts their ancestors had hunted to extinction. Their helmets kept the T-shaped visor, but their iconography screamed defiance. Jagged horns, predatory fangs, markings that turned every soldier into a walking threat. In their camps, fiery speeches echoed through the night about honor reclaimed and enemies punished, about a Mandalore that would kneel to no republic, no Jedi, and no foreign empire. At the center of this storm stood Pre Vizsla, governor of the mining moon Concordia by day, warlord in exile by night. Charismatic, ruthless, and patient, he embodied the contradiction of this era, a man who shook Satine's hand in public while ordering bombings and assassinations in secret. Concordia, officially a peaceful graveyard for old warriors, became Death Watch's hidden fortress. From there, and from scattered camps across the system, they staged terrorist attacks, sabotaged infrastructure, and orchestrated provocations designed to make Satine's pacifism appear weak and dangerous. Pre Vizsla commanded more than soldiers. He carried a symbol. Clipped to his belt, igniting with a crackling hum, was an ancient weapon that did not glow blue or green or Sith red, but a flat, hungry black. This was the dark saber, a lightsaber whose blade drank in surrounding light, edged with a pale corona that traced each motion through the air. In battle, it turned Vizsla into a living legend, a warlord wielding a relic that seemed to bend the Force itself around its obsidian core. The story of the Sith begins not with Mandalorians, yet this weapon's origin lay in a rare bridge between their worlds. The darksaber had been forged by Tara Vizsla, the first Mandalorian ever inducted into the Jedi Order, a figure whose life sat at the crossroads of creed and council. In Death Watch hands, it was more than a blade. It was a claim to destiny, and the full tale of how Tara created it, how it left the Jedi Temple, and how it became the key to ruling Mandalore has not yet been told in this history. But what followed was anything but peaceful. Tara Vizsla and the birth of the darksaber power is never neutral. In Mandalorian history, it often takes the shape of a single weapon. For this culture of armor and oath, that weapon is not a beskar spear or a heavy blaster, but a blade of hungry darkness forged by a man who stood between worlds. Tara Vizsla lived in an age when Mandalorians and Jedi still met each other most often on the battlefield. Yet he became the first Mandalorian ever inducted into the Jedi Order, a quiet fracture in the old pattern of war. The story of the Sith begins not with his name, but his path mirrors theirs in one crucial way. He sought power through the Force, yet carried the memory of a warrior creed that glorified conflict, clan, and personal honor. Within the halls of the Jedi Temple, Tara learned to listen to the living Force, to discipline anger and master the lightsaber forms. But he also remembered beskar, jetpacks, and the harsh skies of Mandalore. From that tension came his masterpiece. He forged a compact, black-bladed lightsaber whose flat, angular silhouette evoked a traditional Mandalorian sword. Its blade drank in the light around it, humming with an ancient, almost storm-like presence, a thin outline of white fire tracing its edge as it cut through the air. They believed that every lightsaber was a reflection of its maker's spirit. The darksaber, as it came to be called, reflected something more, an attempt to reconcile Jedi restraint with Mandalorian ferocity. In Tara's hands, it was both a weapon and a question, a reminder that the Force could move through beskar and creed as easily as through robes and council chambers. After Tara's death, the Jedi kept the darksaber in a place of honor within the temple, a relic of an unusual knight whose existence hinted at a different future. For a time, it gathered dust in a vault while the galactic story moved on. But what followed was not quiet remembrance. During a later conflict between the Republic and Mandalorian forces, House Vizsla descended on Coruscant, They penetrated the temple's defenses, found Tara's blade, and what they found there would change everything for Mandalore. Carrying the stolen darksaber back to their people, House Vizsla raised it as a banner. In their hands, it became more than an heirloom. It was proof that a Mandalorian had once mastered the Force and the Jedi's own weapon. Over generations, an informal rule emerged. Whoever wielded the darksaber by right of combat could claim the mantle of Mandalore. Victory over the current bearer in open challenge bound weapon and rulership together. For the next 1,000 years, the darksaber's path would trace the rise and fall of Mandalorian power. It would pass from House Vizsla to splinter groups such as Death Watch, vanish in war, reappear in hidden caches, and survive even the Empire's purges. As a pattern interrupt in Mandalorian history, it sits at the crossroads of every major turning point. Seen from above, the darksaber's journey forms a dark thread, from Jedi Vault to Vizsla warlords to fanatic insurgents, and eventually into the hands of a lone bounty hunter named Din Djarin. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history forever, but that chapter lies further along the timeline. For now, the darksaber has been born, stolen, and crowned as the key to Mandalorian rule, and the galaxy will feel its edge again and again. Allies of convenience, Death Watch, Maul, and the Shadow Collective. Power rarely arrives alone. It brings allies, rivals, and shadows. On Mandalore, the darksaber had always promised unity through strength, but what followed was not unity at all. It was an invitation for the dark side to step openly onto the galactic stage, wearing Mandalorian armor as its mask. In the aftermath of repeated failures against Satine's pacifist government, Pre Vizsla found his Death Watch stranded on the margins. Exiled to Concordia, reduced to scattered cells and secret camps, they believed that Mandalore had grown weak and that the only path forward was through renewed war. Frustrated by limited progress and dwindling patience, Vizsla turned to an unlikely source of aid: two stranded warriors of terrifying power, Darth Maul and his brother, Savage Opress. The story of the Sith begins not with monsters, but with former Jedi, and Maul carried that same twisted legacy into Mandalorian affairs. Broken, abandoned, and burning for revenge against both Jedi and Republic, he offered Death Watch a simple bargain: strength in exchange for a foothold. Vizsla, armed with the darksaber and convinced he could control any ally, welcomed Maul as a weapon, not a master. What they found there would change everything, because Maul had no intention of remaining anyone's subordinate. Drawing on old underworld contacts and new terror, Maul forged the Shadow Collective, a criminal empire in miniature. He bent Black Sun on Mustafar, the Pikes on Obadiah, and even the Hutt Khajidics toward a shared purpose, binding them with fear and promise of profit. This coalition of syndicates became the unseen hand behind Mandalore's next crisis, a dark web of smugglers, assassins, and mercenaries ready to manufacture conflict on command. With Death Watch providing the armor and Maul providing the strategy, Mandalore descended into orchestrated chaos. Bombings and gang wars erupted in Sundari's pristine streets. Criminals, secretly aligned with the Shadow Collective, terrorized civilians under the domes. Then, Death Watch would arrive in perfect formation, staging dramatic rescues, capturing their own agents, and parading false victories before the holocams. To a frightened population, Satine's new Mandalorians suddenly appeared helpless, while Vizsla's warriors seemed decisive, almost heroic. Yet beneath this spectacle, tension coiled. Vizsla dreamed of a restored warrior Mandalore, independent of both Jedi and Sith, guided by ancient codes and the symbolism of the darksaber. Maul sought something colder: personal power, vengeance, and a throne he could use as leverage against the greater galactic war. Two predators now hunted the same prize. How long could such an alliance endure? The answer would come in the throne room of Sundari. As Maul's influence deepened and Death Watch fractured, the duel became inevitable. Darksaber against Crimson Blade, creed against pure dark side will. The outcome would place Mandalore under a form of rule it had never known before. As a Sith reached for the Mandalorian throne, and the entire planet stood on the edge of a new, shadowed era. The fall of Pre Vizsla, a Sith claims. The darksaber power on Mandalore had always been decided in open conflict. But in Sundari, it arrived first as theater. Under Maul's guidance, Death Watch and the Shadow Collective staged a crisis, unleashing criminal syndicates across the domed capital, so that Pre Vizsla and his warriors could sweep in as apparent saviors. To a frightened populace, armored Mandalorians driving back chaos seemed preferable to a distant pacifist duchess who refused to answer war with war. They believed that this spectacle would legitimize their coup. With the Republic distracted by the Clone Wars and the Jedi far away, Vizsla announced the arrest of Duchess Satine Kryze, presenting her as the symbol of a failed, weak era. In the throne room of Sundari, the new Mandalorian dream ended in binders and humiliation, as Satine was paraded before her own people and removed from power under the illusion of restoring order and ancient strength. What followed was a quiet, inevitable fracture between conspirators. Vizsla had always imagined Mandalore reborn under House Vizsla, the dark saber raised as a banner for a purely Mandalorian empire, Maul steeped in the dark side, and Sith training saw Mandalore instead as a strategic throne, a lever against both Republic and Separatists. When Vizsla tried to discard his Sith ally, Maul invoked an older law than any Satine had ever spoken, trial by combat for the right to rule. In the Great Hall, before Death Watch and allied clans, Pre Vizsla faced Maul. Vizsla came armed with every emblem of Mandalorian power: beskar armor, jetpack, blasters, flamethrower, and the ancient darksaber blazing black against the air. Maul met him with a crimson lightsaber and feral precision, the force coiled around every movement. The duel crashed through the throne room, a storm of jets, sparks, and blade-on-blade fury, Creed straining against pure dark side will. For a time, Vizsla's skill held. He drove Maul back with rockets and flame, switching from blasters to blade in seamless drilled patterns that spoke of generations of war. Yet, the longer the battle continued, the more Maul's raw power asserted itself. A thrown knee, a wrenching force pull, a final disarming strike, then the darksaber fell from Vizsla's grasp, and with one clean decapitation, his line of rule ended on the polished floor of Sundari. By Mandalorian tradition, the victor who claimed the darksaber claimed the right to lead. Maul lifted the hilt, and in that moment, a non-Mandalorian Sith became Mandalore in the strict, brutal letter of the Creed. Around him, warriors knelt, bound more by ancient law than by loyalty to this horn-crowned outsider. For the next 1,000 years of Mandalorian storytelling, that image would haunt their history. Beskar-clad elites bowing to a foreign warlord. Not all bent the knee. Bo-Katan Kryze, Satine's sister, and a commander within Death Watch refused to accept that tradition could be twisted to crown a Sith. To her, Mandalore was more than a weapon to be wielded by the dark side. It was a people, a heritage, a responsibility. She turned away, gathering those who shared her outrage, even as Maul installed a puppet prime minister and tightened his grip on the domed cities. What they found there would change everything for Mandalore: an occupation masked as order, a throne ruled from the shadows, and a growing resistance inside the very armor that had once served Death Watch. Bo-Katan's rejection became the spark of quiet rebellion, whispered in barracks and alleyways, carried clan to clan. As Maul's crimson gaze settled over the planet and Satine languished in captivity, the stage was set for a final shattering confrontation. The siege of Mandalore was coming, and with it, the last great battle of the Clone Wars, where Jedi gunships, Republic legions, and Mandalorian rebels would all converge on Sundari's glassed plains, and the Darksaber's legacy would plunge into even deeper shadow. The Siege of Mandalore. War at the edge of an empire's fall. In the final days of the Clone Wars, as the galactic map burned with 1,000 scattered battles, Mandalore became the focus of a much quieter, more personal war. Bo-Katan Kryze, once Death Watch, now rebel against Maul's dark rule, reached beyond Mandalore's domes to an old enemy of the Sith. She sought out Ahsoka Tano, the former Jedi Padawan who had walked away from the Order, believing its war had strayed from the light side of the Force. Their meeting on the industrial world of Obadiah was simple, almost understated, but what followed was anything but. Bo-Katan spoke of Maul's iron grip on Sundari, of Mandalorian children growing up under a Sith usurper's shadow. Ahsoka hesitated, no longer a Jedi, no longer bound to the Republic. Yet the suffering on Mandalore, and the echo of Anakin Skywalker's teachings drew her back into the conflict. They believed that together, with the Republic's help, Maul could finally be brought down. The Republic's intervention was real, but limited and uneasy. Anakin and Obi-Wan were called away to Coruscant, leaving Ahsoka with command of a detachment of the 501st Legion, their armor repainted with orange markings in her honor. Gunships descended through Sundari's hazy sky, their engines howling over the glassed plains as blue and orange clone troopers rappelled onto landing platforms and thoroughfares. The pacifist city, once a symbol of neutral order, became a battlefield yet again. Street by street, level by level, the siege of Mandalore unfolded. Clones and night owls fought Maul's loyalist super commandos in narrow alleys and along curving bridges, blaster fire reflecting in the polished interiors of the dome. Above, jetpacks traced burning arcs across the air, Mandalorians colliding in mid-flight, beskar scraping beskar. Below, in the underworks and forgotten tunnels, Maul moved through the dark like a wounded predator, sensing through the Force that something far greater than Mandalore's fate was approaching. Ahsoka pursued him into the bowels of the city, then up onto high walkways suspended beneath Sundari's vast domes. There, amid wind, sirens, and the glow of failing shields, she confronted the former Sith apprentice. Maul raved about Darth Sidious, about an unseen plan to destroy the Jedi and remake the Republic into an empire. For a moment, the duel felt less like a personal vendetta and more like a warning from the edge of galactic history. He was defeated and captured, suspended in a Mandalorian restraint device once built to hold Jedi. Yet even this victory trembled. As Maul's regime collapsed and Bo-Katan prepared to lead a fragile new government, Order 66 was already on its way, racing through the currents of the Force. Here, the story pauses. Mandalore had now endured ancient crusades, Jedi war, pacifist reform, civil war, Sith rule, and Republic occupation. How much can one world bear before its culture fractures beyond repair? Because the same Republic gunships that had just liberated Sundari would soon fly under a new banner, and the empire that rose from there, ashes would return to Mandalore with a far more merciless purpose. From Republic to Empire, Mandalore. Under the Imperial boot, power never truly disappears. It only changes uniforms. As the Clone Wars ended and the Republic rebranded itself as the Galactic Empire, Mandalore discovered that liberation had simply given way to a different occupation, one wrapped in cleaner armor and colder promises. In the first quiet months after the siege of Mandalore, the world stood at a crossroads. The Republic had helped drive Maul and his Shadow Collective from Sundari, but the Jedi were fading, and the Senate that once claimed to defend democracy now answered to a single emperor. Mandalore's history of war, its beskar, and its position on the galactic map made it far too valuable for this new regime to ignore. What followed was not open conquest, but a slower, more insidious tightening of control. The Empire had learned that blaster fire was expensive and that fear could be cheaper. Rather than ruling every world directly, it preferred compliant local leaders who could be paraded as symbols of order. On Mandalore, this meant installing puppet regimes that spoke of stability while signing away resources and sovereignty. Old fissures between new Mandalorians, traditional clans, and former Death Watch loyalists became tools, carefully pried open by Imperial advisors who understood that a divided warrior culture would never threaten their rule. They believed that Mandalorians could be turned from proud defenders into useful enforcers. From this belief came the Imperial Super Commandos, elite units of Mandalorians in white and red armor, sworn not to a Mandalore, but to the Empire itself. Under figures such as Gar Saxon, these warriors traded the ancient creed for rank, privilege, and the illusion of restored honor. Beskar flowed into Imperial foundries, and in return, collaborators were granted a narrow corridor of power, always watched, never trusted. Yet even under this new order, the ember of resistance refused to die. Bo-Katan Kryze, who had once rejected the pacifism of her sister Satine and then the dark rule of Maul, now refused to kneel to an emperor she had never chosen. She and other traditionalists, scattered across clan strongholds and hidden bases, waged a quieter war, sabotaging supply lines, undermining imperial governors, and trying to rally a population exhausted by decades of conflict. Many Mandalorians, weary of seeing Sundari rebuilt only to fall again, hesitated, torn between survival under the Empire and another plunge into chaos. The story of the Sith begins not with Mandalore, yet the shadow of their last Dark Lord still hung over this era. The same Imperial machine that Darth Sidious had forged now studied Mandalore's stubbornness and began to plan something far harsher than occupation. Whispers moved through hidden channels, rumors of contingency plans and total sterilization protocols. They spoke of a coming night when the domes would burn and the sky itself would fall. In those hushed warnings, a single word took shape: the Purge, a storm of fire and fusion bombs that would not simply conquer Mandalore, but nearly erase it from the map. Sabine Wren and the weapon that broke the creed. In the shadow of those whispered Purge protocols, the Mandalorian tragedy narrowed from planets and domes to a single young artist with paint on her armor and blue in her hair. Her name was Sabine Wren of Clan Wren, born into a noble house on Cronist, trained from childhood in the old ways of discipline, color, and clan honor. When the Empire rose from the corpse of the Republic, her family believed that cooperation might spare Mandalore from yet another galactic war. They believed that service in Imperial ranks could shield their world from the worst excesses of occupation. So Sabine entered the Imperial Academy on Mandalore, not as a conqueror, but as a cadet, a prodigy in design, explosives, and weapons theory. In the sterile halls of that academy, surrounded by white plastoid and Imperial insignia, her creativity was harnessed for something new. The Empire wanted a tool that could end Mandalorian resistance forever, a weapon that did not simply pierce beskar, but turned it against its wearer. Sabine proposed theoretical solutions, refined energy profiles, and helped design an arc-wave device that could seek out the unique alloys of Mandalorian armor. What followed was the birth of a weapon the Imperials would name, with cold irony, the Duchess. The Duchess did not shatter plates or melt helmets. It superheated beskar at range, making the armor itself a conduit of agony, flash-frying those who trusted it most. The greatest symbol of Mandalorian power became a perfect target signature. On test ranges, armor turned to glowing cages. In classified field trials, entire squads of proud warriors fell without a single blaster bolt touching bare skin. When Sabine learned that her designs had been deployed against her own people, the effect was shattering. Reports filtered back of clans forced to kneel, of holdouts in beskar reduced to ash in their own cuirasses. The Empire framed it as efficiency. Some Mandalorian collaborators and Imperial supercommandos called it necessary. To Sabine, it was a violation of everything the Creed had ever meant. Guilt became a constant presence, heavier than any helmet. In a rare act of conscience within the machinery of the Empire, she sabotaged her work, spoke out, and fled. An exile carrying secrets and shame into the growing rebellion. Her defection did not heal Mandalorian unity. It fractured it further. Some saw her as the architect of their suffering, a traitor whose genius had armed their oppressors. Others blamed the clans who had stood beside Imperial officers and activated the Duchess against their own cousins. In campfire arguments and encrypted transmissions, the question lingered. Who had truly broken the Creed, the designer, or the ones who pulled the trigger? Sabine's path curved away from Mandalore, through rebel cells and forgotten worlds, but the weight of her actions never left her. On Dathomir, in the dark halls once claimed by a former Sith pretender, she and her allies found relics of another Mandalorian age. Among them lay an ancient black-bladed lightsaber, humming with history and quiet menace. What they found there would change everything. Sabine reached down and lifted the darksaber, unaware that this simple motion would pull her into Mandalore's long chain of leaders, and that this act of mercy would reshape galactic history forever. The darksaber returns. Sabine Wren and the spark of rebellion. Power can rest quietly in a single object, waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to claim it. In Sabine Wren's hands, the darksaber was not just a weapon. It was a mirror reflecting everything she wanted to escape from in her own past. On the rebel world of Atollon, Jedi Knight Kanan Jarrus began to train Sabine with the ancient blade, while Ezra Bridger watched and assisted. The darksaber's black core and pale corona hissed through the air as she swung, her movements fast but unfocused. Each strike grew heavier, not because of the beskar hilt, but because Kanan forced her to confront what lay beneath her armor: the guilt of designing Imperial weapons, the shame of betraying Mandalorians who later died under the Empire's rule, the fear that her family had chosen the Empire over her. What followed was not a simple lesson in swordplay, but a painful excavation of memory. Kanan explained that the blade responded to its wielder's connection to the Force, to conviction and clarity more than raw strength. Sabine felt the darksaber dragging at her arms, as if the whole weight of Mandalore's history pressed down through Tara Vizsla's creation. They believed that whoever carried it also carried the expectations of scattered clans, the echo of House Vizsla, and the unspoken question of worthiness. Was she a traitor or a future leader, or something in between that Mandalorian tradition had no word for? When Sabine finally returned to Mandalorian space, the conflict became real. She went home to the icy world of Crownest, to House Wren's fortress, and to a mother who had bent the knee to the Empire simply to keep the family alive. There she confronted Gar Saxon, Imperial Viceroy of Mandalore and a brutal enforcer of Imperial rule. The darksaber clashed against Saxon's own weapon in a duel that fused personal anger with galactic war, Mandalorian honor against Imperial control. Sabine defeated him, but refused to execute him in cold blood. His attempt to shoot her in the back led to his death by her mother's hand instead, a moment that exposed how thin the Empire's hold truly was. Here, a brief interruption in the march of events reveals the blade itself. The story of the Sith begins not with Mandalorians, yet this single saber has traced a path through their entire history. Forged by Tara Vizsla in the Jedi Order, claimed by House Vizsla, stolen by the dark side under Maul, recovered by Sabine, and soon to be offered to Bo-Katan Kryze. One weapon, crossing centuries, binding Jedi, Sith, Empire, and Mandalorian together in a single, unbroken line. Sabine chose not to crown herself with that legacy. Instead, she used the darksaber as a banner, rallying clans against the Empire, then placing it in Bo-Katan's hands, believing her the one who could truly unite Mandalore. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history forever, setting the stage for Mandalore's next rise, and for the terrible price the Empire would exact in return. Bo-Katan Kryze, reluctant heir to a broken world. Bo-Katan Kryze understood, perhaps better than any living Mandalorian, that power on Mandalore was never simple. Born into Clan Kryze, sister to Duchess Satine, she had watched her world pass through extremes: the pacifist domes of the new Mandalorians, the violent crusade of Deathwatch, and the cold, precise domination of Sith and Empire. The story of the Sith begins not with monsters, and in the same way, the story of Bo-Katan begins not with a villain, but with a loyal soldier who believed that Mandalore had to be strong or perish. As Satine tried to keep Mandalore neutral and peaceful, Bo-Katan joined Deathwatch, convinced that abandoning war meant abandoning identity. What followed was a slow disillusionment. She saw Pre Vizsla ally with Darth Maul, saw Mandalorian honor bent to the will of a Zabrak, steeped in the dark side, saw Sundari's throne room turned into a dueling ground for outsiders. When Maul murdered Satine and seized the capital, Bo-Katan broke from him, choosing her world over her faction. In that moment, she learned that extremism could destroy Mandalore just as thoroughly as pacifism could leave it defenseless. Years later, when Sabine Wren placed the darksaber in her hands, Bo-Katan did not rush to claim it. The black blade of Tara Vizsla was more than a weapon. In Mandalorian history, it was a verdict. Those who carried it drew clans, wars, and destinies into their orbit. Bo-Katan had seen what that meant under Maul and under the Empire. She knew that leadership of Mandalore was as much a curse as an honor, a burden that could drag a house into ruin as easily as it could lift a people to glory. She hesitated, questioning whether the clans would follow her, whether the Force itself had turned away from Mandalore. They believed that the darksaber should be won in combat, that only victory could legitimize rule. Yet Sabine's offer came not through duel, but through trust, through the quiet recognition of shared scars. Reluctantly, Bo-Katan accepted, igniting the blade over gathered warriors of Clan Wren, Clan Vizsla, and others who had suffered under Imperial rule. In that moment, the fractured houses of Mandalore glimpsed unity again. What followed was a brief, fierce resurgence. Under Bo-Katan's banner, Mandalorian strike forces hit Imperial garrisons, sabotage supply lines, and push back the Empire's grip on their sector. The Darksaber became a symbol on battlefields and in shadowed cantinas, whispered about by stormtroopers who suddenly found beskar-clad warriors cutting through their lines. For the first time since the siege of Mandalore, the planet's warriors were not fighting each other, but turning their full power against a common enemy. Yet this fragile unity existed in the shadow of a greater galactic war. Palpatine's empire still commanded fleets, inquisitors, and legions of stormtroopers. The Rebel Alliance was only beginning to gain momentum. Mandalore's victories, impressive as they were, unfolded on the margins of a vast, dark conflict that the Mandalorians did not control. For a heartbeat in history, Mandalore stood tall, clans rallied, banners flying, the Darksaber held high in Bo-Katan's hand. Then came the whisper that every survivor would learn to fear. What they found there would change everything, and what came next would be spoken of only in hushed tones. The Night of 1,000 Tears, the Great Purge, when Mandalore was nearly wiped from the stars. The Great Purge, Night of 1,000 Tears. Power can shatter more than armies. It can erase memory itself. Over Mandalore, the Empire chose not simply to win a war, but to unmake a culture. The Great Purge began without warning, and what followed was a night that would be remembered only in fragments, passed down in broken whispers. The Night of 1,000 Tears. The first sign was the sky. Over the domes and shattered plains of Mandalore, wings of Imperial TIE bombers descended in precise, merciless formations. Their silhouettes crossed the clouds in endless waves, and then the fusion bombs fell. Cities that had survived centuries of conflict, from the old Crusades to the Clone Wars, dissolved in white fire. Glass, metal, and stone ran together into molten rivers, glowing beneath a darkened sky choked with ash. The very surface of Mandalore, already scarred by its own history, was hammered into a lifeless, fused wasteland. This was not a targeted strike against a single fortress or rebel base. The Empire aimed at the very heart of Mandalorian identity. Fusion charges detonated over beskar forges where armor had been shaped for generations. Foundries that once rang with the sound of hammers fell silent in an instant. Cultural centers, clan archives, and ancient repositories of songs and battle records were reduced to slag. They believed that if the stories, the crests, and the craft were destroyed, then the people themselves would fade more easily into the darkness of galactic history. For survivors, the bombing was only the beginning. When the fires dimmed to a dull, poisonous glow, Imperial forces descended into the ruins. Stormtroopers in white armor marched through shattered corridors and collapsed. Domes flanked by towering KX-series security droids whose glowing optics cut through the smoke. Their orders were simple: eliminate Mandalorian resistance and any symbol of Mandalorian power. Anyone found in beskar, from seasoned warriors to desperate defenders still clutching scorched helmets, was cut down and left amid the ash and echoes. In this chaos, the last symbols of Mandalorian sovereignty were stripped away. Bo-Katan Kryze, who had once raised the Darksaber as a banner of unity, lost both her world and her claim. The exact moment is shrouded in conflicting accounts, as is often the case when empires fall and rise, but the outcome is clear. The blade passed out of Mandalorian hands. An ambitious Imperial officer, Moff Gideon, came to possess it, turning the legendary weapon into a trophy. In his grasp, the Darksaber no longer promised a throne on Mandalore. It mocked a people whose destiny had been stolen. In the aftermath, Mandalore was left broken, its surface glassed, its cities gutted, its people scattered. Some survivors hid among the stars under false names, trading armor for anonymity. Others formed secret covert enclaves in forgotten corners of the Outer Rim, clinging to old creeds and whispered oaths. The story of the Sith begins not with Mandalore, yet the same dark side patterns echoed here: fear, control, and the quiet erasure of those who stood in the Empire's way. For the next 1,000 years, legends would say, the planet itself might remain a tomb. But legends are rarely the end. In the shadows of a galaxy ruled by the Empire's remnants, masked figures still gathered around hidden forges, passing down a single, stubborn belief: that Mandalore was not finished. Somewhere beyond the glassed plains and the stolen Darksaber, a new claimant would rise, and the scattered tribes would be forced to choose whether to remain ghosts or to return. Children of the Watch. A creed in the dark. But for those who survived, belief became armor. When planets were lost and banners burned, creed was the only territory that could not be bombed into glass. In the long shadow of the Purge, as the Empire and its remnants hunted Mandalorians across the stars, what followed was a quiet fragmentation. Clans, houses, and wandering mercenaries drifted apart, each deciding in isolation what it meant to remain Mandalorian when Mandalore itself was gone. One of the most secretive of these splinters called itself the Children of the Watch. They believed that the old ways had been abandoned, that Mandalore had fallen because its people had strayed from a harsher, purer path. While others tried to blend into the galactic underworld or serve distant warlords, the children withdrew. They built hidden coverts in forgotten sewers, abandoned mines, and deep caverns, living beneath the notice of the Republic's heirs and the last agents of the Empire. Their practices were severe. Helmets were never to be removed in the presence of another living being, turning every face into a blank sheet of beskar, and every conversation into an encounter with a mask. They emerged only in small numbers, one hunter at a time, to trade their skills for credits and armor, then vanished back into the dark. Around their forges, the armorer repeated the same refrain, a ritual answer to doubt and fear. This is the way. They believed that blood alone did not define Mandalorians. Foundlings, abandoned or orphaned children from any world, were to be rescued, sworn to the creed, and wrapped in beskar as soon as they were able to bear its weight. A child from a farming moon, a city world, or a forgotten battlefield could be taken in and, through oath and training, become as Mandalorian as any scion of an ancient house. In an age when legacies crumbled, this act of mercy would reshape galactic history forever. The name of the Watch carried an older echo. During the Clone Wars, Death Watch had also hidden in remote strongholds, insisting that true Mandalore meant armor, honor, and separation from the soft ideals of the new Mandalorians. The story of the Sith begins not with monsters or demons, but with Jedi who lost their way. In the same manner, the line from Death Watch to the Children of the Watch suggests not a new creed, but a harder, more secret continuation of an old one. Into this sect fell a child of war. During the Clone Wars, as droids razed his world and his parents died in fire, a boy named Din Djarin was pulled from a bunker by armored warriors. What they found there would change everything for him. Not a homeworld, but a promise. Raised as a foundling beneath the armorer's guidance, he became a hunter whose skills were feared across the Outer Rim. A man who had never again shown his face. For the next 1,000 years, Mandalorians would say that their people were a creed, not a race. But what happens when a foundling shaped by the strictest version of that creed is tasked with protecting a child of the Jedi's legacy, one who stirs the Force itself with a glance? The answer would draw the scattered tribes, the remnants of the Empire, and the ghosts of the old Jedi Order toward a new quiet war over the future of Mandalore. Din Djarin. The Mandalorian and the child power shapes warriors, but creed shapes what those warriors will protect. In the quiet decades after the fall of the Empire, one Mandalorian walked the Outer Rim as if the old wars had never ended. Din Djarin was introduced not as a general or a ruler, but as a single silent hunter in gleaming beskar, crossing frozen seas and shadowed streets with the calm precision of a blade drawn in slow motion. He belonged to a hidden covert beneath the world's notice, a remnant of a shattered people living in tunnels and forgotten chambers. There, the creed was everything, helmets never removed, questions never asked, foundlings protected as fiercely as blood heirs. Din moved through this world as a true believer, trading his skill for Imperial credits and rare beskar, returning each bounty without hesitation. To him, the guild contracts were simple transactions, and the code of his covert was the only law that mattered. That certainty began to fracture with a single commission. On the dusty world of Arvala 7, guided only by a fob and a set of vague coordinates, Din hunted a mysterious asset wanted desperately by Imperial remnants. What followed was a slow, methodical approach through Mudhorn tracks, Nikto gunfire, and the unlikely aid of Queel, a patient Ugnaught who had spoken to many empires rise and fall. At the end of that trail stood a small floating cradle. When Din opened it, what they found there would change everything. Inside was not a weapon or a warlord, but a child, Grogu, small, green, and already stirring the Force with wordless instinct. The sight did not break the creed, but it cracked the armor around Din's life. He delivered the child to the client in a dim Imperial safe house, took his beskar reward, and returned to the forge. Yet the silence of the covert and the echo of Grogu's gaze gnawed at him. They believed that bounty hunters did not ask why. Din turned back. His decision to storm the safe house and rescue Grogu was a single act of disobedience, but this act of mercy would reshape galactic history forever. In an instant, every fob in the city lit up. The guild turned on him. Blaster fire filled the streets. Then, from the shadows, came the roar of jetpacks as his covert emerged into open war for the first time since the Purge. Mandalorians sacrificing their secrecy to shield a lone warrior and a foundling. The cost was immense. The covert was scattered, armor left in grim piles. Yet, in the aftermath, the armorer read the currents of creed and destiny. Din and Grogu, she declared, were now a clan of two, bound by honor until the child could be reunited with his own kind. With that, the Mandalorian way was set on a collision course with the lost heritage of the Jedi, and somewhere in the dark between stars, old powers began to stir in response. The darksaber in Imperial hands. Moff, Gideon's claim? Power taken from the shadows can wound more deeply than power taken in open battle. As Din and Grogu drifted through the New Republic era as a quiet clan of two, another survivor of the Purge moved through the dark, gathering what remained of the old empire and sharpening it into a hidden blade. This was Moff Gideon, a former ISB officer who had studied worlds and peoples the way a surgeon studies anatomy. During the Great Purge of Mandalore, he had overseen targeting, troop movements, and the cold arithmetic of orbital bombardment. Where others saw culture and creed, he saw only potential resistance to be broken. They believed that the Mandalorians could be shattered not only by destroying their cities, but by severing their symbols, their banners, and their claim to destiny. Years later, in the outer reaches of the galactic frontier, Gideon reappeared as commander of a remnant Imperial garrison, armored in black, helmeted, precise. His stormtroopers were cleaner, better drilled, their discipline a faint echo of the old Empire's Iron Order. When his TIE fighter was brought down by Din Djarin over Navarro, it seemed, for a moment, as though one more fragment of Imperial power had finally been extinguished. Then the wreckage moved, a thin line of black light carved through twisted metal. The blade that emerged was ancient and wrong, humming with a low, angry tone that did not match any standard lightsaber. This was the Darksaber, Terra Vizsla's creation, the symbol that had once crowned rulers in the capital of Sundari. In that instant, the galaxy learned that Moff Gideon had not only survived, but carried in his hand the right to rule Mandalore by the old Creed standards. The implications were almost unbearable. An Imperial war criminal, one of the architects of the Purge itself, now held the weapon that Mandalorian history had treated as a crown. What followed was a deepening of the wound that fusion bombs and fire had already carved into Mandalore's memory. To some, it was as if the dark side of the Force had reached into their past and twisted their proudest symbol into a trophy of conquest. Here, a brief pattern interrupt helps the path become clear. Bo-Katan once wielded the Darksaber, claiming it to unite the clans. Then it fell into Gideon's hands, a stolen prize of war. From Gideon it passed, in combat, to Din Djarin. Bo-Katan, Gideon, Din. 3 names, 1 blade, a chain of possession that tracks the slow, painful attempt to reclaim Mandalorian identity. For Bo-Katan Kryze in the 2nd season of The Mandalorian, the hunt for Gideon was never only vengeance for her fallen world. It was a campaign to recover possibility itself. With the Darksaber, she believed that scattered warriors from Concordia, the Moons, and beyond could again be called to a single banner. Without it, each clan remained alone, drifting through the New Republic's uncertain peace. In this way, Gideon's claim turned an old Mandalorian relic into the axis of a new galactic conflict. And somewhere beyond the Outer Rim, the next struggle for Mandalore's soul was already beginning to gather strength. Bo-Katan and Din Djarin. 2 ways one world power can unite a broken people, but it can also reveal the fractures hidden beneath their armor. On the storm-lashed moon of Trask, that truth stepped out of the shadows for Din Djarin when 3 armored figures dropped from the sky and tore apart a Quarren ambush with clinical precision. At first, they were simply Mandalorians, moving with the familiar weight of beskar and battlefield experience. Then, Bo-Katan Kryze removed her helmet. The others followed. In that single quiet gesture, what followed was a shattering of everything Din believed that Mandalorians were. To him, the way was absolute. Never remove the helmet. Never reveal the face. Carry the creed as a living shield against a chaotic galaxy. Bo-Katan saw something very different. To her, Din was not the standard, but a remnant of an old, more rigid splinter group, the Children of the Watch, clinging to ancient austerity in a galaxy that had already burned Mandalore once. She had walked the domes of Sundari, fought in the Clone Wars, and watched the Empire's shadow fall across her world. In her eyes, Mandalorian identity was broader than one-sex rules. It was clan, heritage, shared history, and the will to endure through every war. Their first exchange on Trask was almost theological. Din called them pretenders, insisting they were not truly of the way. Bo-Katan answered with calm dismissal, explaining that his way was only one creed among many. The contrast was stark. A foundling raised in secrecy by survivors of the Great Purge, facing a princess who had once commanded fleets for a galactic republic that no longer existed. Yet when Imperial guns entered the conversation, doctrine became secondary. Together, they boarded a Gazanti cruiser, cutting through stormtroopers in tight corridors, their tactics different, but their purpose aligned. They believed that the Empire was the true enemy, the power that had glassed Mandalore's surface and scattered its warriors to distant moons and backwater worlds. In those metal halls, shared values emerged beneath the conflict over helmets and creed. All of them fought to protect Mandalorians wherever they could be found. All of them carried a deep hatred of the Empire's occupation and the Purge. And all of them, in different ways, respected the legacy of the Darksaber, that ancient blade first forged by Tara Vizsla, the Mandalorian Jedi, whose shadow still stretched across their fate. For Bo-Katan, the Darksaber was everything. She had once held it, then lost it. And what they found there would change everything if she reclaimed it again. A symbol to rally Concordia, the moons, and the scattered clans under one banner. Din, by contrast, remained almost indifferent to rulership. His mission was smaller and stranger. Protect a single child of the Force, and honor his covert's code. This tension would remain unresolved until a future confrontation with Moff Gideon, when the one who cared least about ruling Mandalore would defeat him in single combat, and this act of mercy would reshape galactic history forever. The blade would pass not to Bo-Katan, but to Din Djarin by right of battle, opening a new rift between them and casting fresh uncertainty over Mandalore's rebirth. The duel for nothing. Din, Gideon, and the unwanted throne. Power can pass to the one who seeks it, or to the one who wants nothing to do with it at all. On Gideon's light cruiser, that old Mandalorian paradox would play out in a narrow corridor of durasteel and fire. The assault began with precision and quiet fury. Bo-Katan, Koska Reeves, Cara Dune, and Fennec Shan carved a path through stormtroopers and officers, driving toward the bridge. Din Djarin slipped away from the main thrust, moving alone through dim service passages, guided not by ambition, but by a single purpose: reach the holding cells and free Grogu. What followed was a slow tightening of the noose as alarms echoed, and the cruiser's most terrible weapons began to wake. Sealed behind blast doors, the dark troopers waited. They were not Sith, not Jedi, but something colder, droids built for war, armored in dark alloy, powered by the Empire's lingering hatred of Mandalorians and Jedi alike. Din tried to eject them into space, venting the entire platoon out of an airlock. For a moment, the threat seemed gone. Then a single trooper forced its way back, metal fists hammering the bulkhead with mechanical inevitability. A reminder that in galactic history, the dark side of technology could be as relentless as the Force itself. The duel in the corridor was brutal and narrow. The dark trooper's blows bent the walls, crushed Din's helmet against the deck, and drove him inch by inch toward death. Only the hidden flame of a whistling bird, the snap of a grappling line, and finally the focused thrust of the beskar spear through exposed joints brought the machine down. Din staggered away, armor dented, breathing hard, carrying the spear that could withstand a lightsaber, unaware that what they found there would change everything. In the cell block, Moff Gideon waited, darksaber ignited, its black blade rimmed with pale light, humming with ancient Mandalorian and Jedi history. He stood over Grogu in tiny binders, confident and composed. They believed that Din would simply kill him, take the child, and leave Mandalore's fate in ruins once more. Instead, Din offered a trade. Gideon could keep the blade. Din only wanted the child. The refusal was immediate. Gideon attacked, driving the darksaber down in sweeping arcs that carved molten scars into the walls. Beskar met the legendary weapon in a shower of sparks. Din fought defensively at first, every blow testing the limits of his armor, then pressed forward, turning Gideon's arrogance against him. A final disarm, a strike that sent the darksaber skittering across the floor, and it was over. Din stood victorious, spear lowered, more concerned with lifting Grogu into his arms than with the weapon now in his hand. He carried Gideon and the darksaber to the bridge, thinking the conflict finished. Instead, the true battle was political and unseen. On the bridge, Bo-Katan froze at the sight of Din holding the darksaber. By ancient custom, by the harsh logic that had defined Mandalorian power for generations, the blade could not simply be handed to her. It had to be won in combat, in clear, undeniable victory. Accepting it as a gift would make her rule a hollow claim in the eyes of the scattered clans, another fragile throne propped up by convenience rather than creed. Din offered it without ceremony, almost apologetically, arm outstretched. Bo-Katan did not move. The irony was bitter. The weapon she had chased for years now rested in the hands of a foundling who did not want a throne, who followed a stricter creed than her own. The bridge fell silent, Mandalorian history hanging on an awkward refusal. In that moment, Din held not just a blade, but the unresolved question of Mandalore's future. Then the pattern shattered. Alarms sounded again. The dark troopers, vented into space, returned in formation, hammering at the blast doors in synchronized fury. Just as all seemed lost, a lone X-Wing docked with the cruiser. On the security monitors, a hooded figure moved through the corridors, a green lightsaber cutting through dark troopers with effortless grace. Jedi, in an age that believed them gone. The doors opened, and Luke Skywalker stepped onto the bridge, come for Grogu. Grogu reached out, drawn by the familiar presence in the Force. Din removed his helmet, breaking his own creed so the child could see his face. The farewell was quiet, devastating, and strangely hopeful. Grogu left in Luke's arms, carried toward an ancient Jedi destiny. Din remained behind, alone with Bo-Katan's wounded silence, Gideon's satisfied smirk, and the darksaber hanging heavy at his side. In that stillness, the unwanted Mandalore stood at the center of a crossroads he had never sought. The way demanded loyalty. The blade demanded leadership. Mandalore demanded rebirth. And somewhere beyond the stars, as Grogu's training began, new powers were already stirring, ready to test whether this reluctant guardian would claim the destiny now bound to his name. Return to the ruins. The Mandalorian reclaims his homeworld power can be a creed as much as a weapon. And among Mandalorians, honor is measured in beskar and vows. When Din Djarin removed his helmet to save Grogu, that single act of compassion shattered his standing among the children of the Watch. To them, the way was absolute. He had broken it. The armorer's judgment was calm, unyielding. He was no longer Mandalorian unless he bathed in the living waters beneath the mines of Mandalore, a world they believed that fusion fire had rendered cursed and dead. For many, Mandalore existed only as a wound in galactic memory. Imperial fusion bombing had glassed its once lush surface, turning soil into dark, vitrified plains. When Din and Bo-Katan finally descended toward the planet, what followed was a quiet descent into a graveyard. The elegant domes of cities like Sundari were shattered, their transparent steel ribs twisted and exposed. Craters yawned open where neighborhoods had stood, and the air itself seemed heavy with the echo of distant war. Beneath the ruined skylines, the atmosphere was choked and dim, filtered through greenish haze and drifting ash. Fallen towers lay half-swallowed by dunes of broken glass, reflecting cold starlight in 1,000 fractured points. It was as if the Entire world had been frozen in the instant of its destruction, a monument to the Empire's fear of Mandalorian resistance. Yet under those dead horizons, ancient tunnels and civic corridors still waited, leading down toward the mines that had once fueled Mandalore's power. In those depths, the past struck back. While exploring the ruined Undercity, Din was seized by a spidery, cyborg horror, a scavenger of the dark that harvested armored intruders for their blood and circuitry. His capture forced Bo-Katan to act. She had scoffed at old superstitions and fractured creeds, but she still took up the darksaber, cutting through the mechanical predator in a storm of sparks and fury. In that moment, the reluctant claimant to Mandalore became a protector once more, defending not a throne, but a single foundling grown to warrior. Guided by half-remembered ceremony, Bo-Katan led Din to the living waters themselves, a quiet pool beneath the mines where Mandalore the Great had once been said to commune with the mythosaur. Din recited the creed and stepped into the depths, only to vanish as if pulled by some unseen force. Bo-Katan dove after him, and what they found there would change everything. In the murky glow, a colossal eye opened, a living mythosaur, breathing beneath a world everyone thought broken. Here the story pauses, just for a moment. Water, hidden beneath glass sands, becomes a kind of defiance. Purification lies under devastation, memory under molten rock. It is a reminder that even when empire and war have scoured a planet, the force of tradition, belief, and the unseen can still pool in quiet, sacred places. When Din emerged, his immersion in the living waters restored him in the eyes of the Watch. The armorer accepted him back without hesitation. The creed had been fulfilled. Yet Bo-Katan, who had walked both helmeted and unhelmeted, now carried a different revelation. She had seen that the old legends were not merely stories. Between the strict secrecy of the Children of the Watch and the open faces of her own followers, she began to glimpse a path that might bind Mandalorians together again. The mythosaur's awakening hinted that Mandalore itself was not finished, and that soon, scattered clans across the galaxy would be called to choose whose vision of their future they would follow. The new Mandalore, uniting clans, taming myth, forging future power, can divide as easily as it unites. And on Mandalore, that truth had written itself in ash and glass across the planet's wounded surface. Yet in the quiet that followed the mythosaur's stirring, a different possibility emerged, that a people scattered by war and creed might still find their way back to one another. What followed was a slow, almost reluctant gathering. The Children of the Watch, hidden in their covert and ruled by strict interpretations of the Way, answered Din Djarin's call. Bo-Katan's Night Owls, veterans of Clone Wars and Civil Wars, set aside their bitterness and boarded the same fleet. Other ships arrived bearing sigils from forgotten banners, the Shriek-Hawk of clan cries, the markings of House Vizsla, wanderers from Concordia and beyond. Old insults hung in the air, but the shared memory of the Great Purge and the promise of a home reclaimed held their hands from violence. Deep beneath the shattered surface of Mandalore, that fragile alliance was tested. Din Djarin fell to a cyborg predator in the ruins, a remnant of the dark machinery that had outlived the Empire. Bo-Katan descended after him, wielding the darksaber she no longer claimed by right. In the ensuing battle, she defeated the creature that had already bested Din, reclaiming the blade not through a staged duel, but through the Creed's own logic of combat and survival. They believed that this satisfied tradition. The weapon had passed through defeat, from Gideon to Din, and now, through this victory, back into her hands. As their forces pushed further, what they found there would change everything. Moff Gideon had not merely hidden on Mandalore, he had forged it into a secret foundry. Beskar armored stormtroopers emerged, gleaming white and silver, fusing Imperial design with Mandalorian resilience. Jetpacks roared through cavernous skies as warriors clashed in 3 dimensions, blades of Beskar scraping against blaster-resistant plating. Above, capital ships strained and burned. Below, Gideon's command center became the heart of one last desperate conflict between a dying remnant of the Empire and a people refusing extinction. In the end, the base fell in fire. Gideon's cloned ambitions perished in the flames, and the darksaber itself was crushed in his grasp, a symbol of power broken at the very moment Mandalorians no longer needed it to define them. In the aftermath, symbolic acts carried more weight than any throne. The Great Forge was relit, its molten light reflecting on helms from rival factions as the armorer and Bo-Katan stood side by side, a priestess of the old strictures and a warrior of the more open past, sharing the same flame. Nearby, another quiet rite unfolded. Din Djarin formally adopted Grogu, naming him Din Grogu, binding the child to Mandalorian tradition as a foundling under his protection. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history forever, not through conquest, but through the patient training of a being who touched both Jedi and Mandalorian paths. As the camera of history pulls back, Mandalore breathes again. Its domes are broken, its surface scarred, but its people are home, their future unwritten. Somewhere between the dark mines and the newborn forge, a question lingers, gentle enough to fall asleep to. What will a culture tempered by so much loss choose to become, now that war is no longer the only story it remembers? Creed, blood, or choice? What it means to be Mandalorian. In the quiet after the last bombardment, a pattern emerges. Mandalore rises in armor, falls in fire, and then, from ash and memory, finds a different way to be strong. Long before domes and blockades, there were only crusaders and conquest. The Tong and those who joined them took the name Mandalorian as a banner, not a bloodline, and what followed was an age of war against the Republic and the Jedi. Under figures such as Mandalore the Ultimate, they believed that glory was measured in shattered worlds, until the very surface of Mandalore was burned and glassed by their own excess. Power had been everything, and it had devoured its own home. In the ruins of that warrior empire, another ideal took root. Satine Kryze and the new Mandalorians sealed themselves in gleaming domes, rejecting war and remaking their culture around peace. For a time, the old armor was banished to museums and the creed reduced to a relic. Yet in the shadows, Death Watch clung to beskar and tradition, convinced that only the old ways could restore Mandalorian greatness. The conflict between them showed that the true battle was no longer against the Jedi or the Republic, but over the soul of Mandalore itself. Through it all, one weapon traced a dark line across history: the dark saber. Forged by Tara Vizsla, the first Mandalorian Jedi, it carried both the discipline of the Order and the fury of the clans. Passed from House Vizsla to Pre Vizsla, stolen by Maul, claimed and relinquished by Bo-Katan, and eventually won in silent combat by Din Djarin, it proved that symbols can unite a divided people, or fracture them when the right to wield that symbol is contested. What they found there would change everything was not in the blade, but in how each generation chose to see it. After Maul's brief dark reign and the siege of Mandalore, Imperial occupation brought something colder than civil war. The Great Purge scattered the survivors, turned their beskar into Imperial armor, and left foundlings huddled in sewers and hidden covenants. Yet, even in exile, the question of identity did not fade. Was a Mandalorian defined by bloodline, by the sigil on a pauldron, or by the choice to take in a child and swear to protect it in a hostile galaxy? Sabine Wren, an artist and rebel, carried the darksaber despite the shame of weapons her family had forged for the Empire. Din Djarin, a foundling rescued from a separatist war, followed an ancient creed with a quiet, stubborn honor. Grogu, once a Jedi initiate, accepted a tiny set of beskar mail and a new clan. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history forever, because it showed that for the next 1,000 years, the way might be less about conquest and more about who is sheltered under a Mandalorian's protection. Some might feel drawn to the age of Crusaders, where identity was proven in open war. Others to the fragile calm of Satine's domes, or the lonely paths of scattered exiles hiding their faces from Imperial eyes. Perhaps the most compelling is the era now beginning, in which the broken world is reclaimed by those who choose the creed for themselves. As the forges burn again beneath Mandalore's scarred sky, another question waits at the edge of sleep. In a culture built on armor, what happens when the greatest strength turns out to be the choice to lay down a weapon instead of raising it? Drifting out of orbit, closing the Beskar Chronicle. In the end, even the fiercest war masks a quieter truth. No armor, no empire, no creed can ever fully contain the will of a people. The Mandalorians have proved this across thousands of years, turning defeat into ritual, exile into clan, and silence into a different kind of power. The story that has unfolded is not a straight ascent or a simple fall. It began with conquerors who burned worlds until Mandalore itself was scarred and glassed. A warrior culture that challenged the Jedi and the Republic in open war. What followed was an age of victims, herded into domed cities and pacifist regimes, watching their own history treated as a dangerous relic. From there came collaborators and insurgents in the shadow of the Imperial war machine, then rebels who fought under many banners, and finally scattered survivors, choosing once more what it meant to be Mandalorian without anyone else's permission. They believed that strength could be found in many shapes, in the roaring charge of ancient crusaders, in Satine Kryze's fragile pacifism, in Bo-Katan's stubborn refusal to let the darksaber define her worth, and in a lone hunter crossing the outer rim with a foundling in his arms. Again and again, the creed bent but did not break. Clans fell, houses vanished, yet on ruined Mandalore, beneath a poisoned sky, forges burned again, proving that identity could endure even after the world that birthed it had been shattered. As the galaxy drifts on, the Mandalorian timeline does not end here. For the next 1,000 years in-universe, new battles, quiet alliances, and forgotten heroes will rise and fade beyond the edge of this telling. Somewhere in that distant dark, a child will don a helmet for the first time. A leader will raise a banner over the ruins of Sundari, and a small ship will slip into hyperspace, its beskar hull catching the starlight. Whether awake or asleep, the listener's absence cannot halt that motion. History in this galaxy continues to unfold in the background, steady and unhurried. If eyes remain open and thoughts are still traveling among the stars, there are other calm histories waiting. The story of the Sith begins not with monsters, but with Jedi who turn toward the dark side. The long wars of the clones, the hidden paths of the Jedi after Order 66, forgotten empires at the galactic rim, all can be traced in the same quiet, chronological way, one era at a time. For those who wish to shape what comes next, a final invitation lingers as softly as a closing hatch. In the stillness after this chronicle, a thought can be left behind. Which Mandalorian age deserves a deeper dream? Which clan? Which helm? Which name in Beskar script should anchor the next sleep-bound journey? Perhaps an entire night among the new Mandalorians in their domes, or a slow descent through the tunnels of the Great Purge, or a gentle, detailed path following a single clan from glory to ruin and back. Wherever the listener rests now, and however far consciousness drifts from the glow of this distant galaxy, the stars above Mandalore remain. They wait over the desert of Concordia, over the shipyards of Kuat, over every forgotten battlefield where armor once shone. When awareness returns, those constellations will still be there, and the Mandalorians will still be walking beneath them, choosing and re-choosing what their creed means. In that constancy lies a final comfort, a closing benediction carried on quiet hyperspace winds. This is the way.